Okay, this is me now. And this is me after I drink this coffee. Can I change it while I'm streaming? I don't know. I'm gonna do it anyways. You guys. Good morning. Okay. Oops. Okay. That's the best one. Hey, laptop. Charger. Hey, buddy. Gotta put it on. This is the controller. That's not plugged in. Also, I don't have the controller, so I have to go get it. I can use this one. I can use that one. I can do that. Before I can finish my coffee, so I can. Dang. Oh. Snapped up. Excuse me. This. Should have set up the computer before. Probably. Oh, dang it. Okay, it showed up, but it didn't show up on here. Solution, wait patiently while it updates. Did it update? Oh, okay. that now? 7 PB. Jam. Have it. Why is it opening? So Updating. It's locked up for like 2 months. Oh, time's up. Cozy. More updates. cable management. There we go. Okay, time to play some games. Okay. There. Please, sorry, thanks. Nah, I'm gonna read first.
Reading first.
Okay, so it's been 26 minutes and I haven't done anything.
Perfect.
All I did was get situated, which takes me forever because I'm crazy. And yeah. Also, it's not gaming time, so I don't need these. Those there. Those there. Those there. Yeah. Yeah. It's my book stack. And then I'm going to use it to hold my microphone up. There we go. So I left off with Hidden Potential, and I'm going to keep reading this book. And then after, I will read the Bible. And then after that, I will game. And then what? I don't know. Take a nap. I don't know what time it is. 6 o'clock. Cool. Okay. So page 31. Getting the arena. Fans of learning styles would have us believe that verbal learning is good for one person and auditory learning is good for another person. But learning is not always about finding the right method for you. It's often about finding the right method for the task. A fascinating demonstration comes from an experiment where students were given just over 20 minutes to go through a science article. Half were randomly assigned to read it, and the other half listened to it. The listeners enjoyed the lesson more than the readers, but when they were quizzed 2 days later, it was clear they had learned less. The listeners scored 59%. The reader scored 81%. Although listening is more often fun, reading improves comprehension and recall. Whereas listening promotes intuitive thinking, reading activates more analytical processing. It's true in English and Chinese. People display better logical reasoning when the same trivia questions, riddles, and puzzles are written rather than spoken. With print, you naturally slow down at the start of a paragraph to process the core idea and use paragraph breaks and headers to chunk information. Unless you have a reading disability or learning disorder that makes it difficult to parse text, when it comes to critical thinking, there's no substitute for reading. Learning a foreign language requires a different approach. In school, Sarah Maria Hasbin learned vocabulary and grammar by reading textbooks and making endless stacks of index cards. Her classes didn't require much speaking, and she didn't feel ready to talk until she had committed a great deal of vocabulary to memory. She was afraid of sounding stupid, so she avoided the discomfort altogether and stuck to English. In college, Sarah Maria ended up majoring in linguistics. She realized that her approach was similar to reading a bunch of books about piano or figure skating, and then expecting to be able to concertos like Clara Schumann and do a triple axel like Chrissy Yamaguchi. But no matter how hard you concentrate, you can't see a Castilian accent with your eyes. Visualize a diagram of it in your mind, or internalize it through an interpretive dance. If you want to understand it, you have to listen to it with your ears. If you want to speak it, you have to practice saying the words out loud. Sure enough, in meta-analysis, saying the words out loud, that's what I'm doing now. Sure enough, in meta-analysis of dozens of experiments, students and adults were more adept at understanding and speaking a new language over time when they had been taught to produce it, rather than only to comprehend it. They also learned better in flipped classrooms that challenged them to study vocabulary before class and then practice communicating during class. The popular adage, use it or lose it, doesn't go far enough. If you don't use it, you might never gain it in the first place. It's not enough to simply accept minimal discomfort when it arises. Surprisingly, we're better off actively seeking out discomfort. Sarah Maria did that by moving to Madrid for a job teaching English and deliberately choosing to live with a family that only spoke Spanish. By the end of the summer, she was speaking fluently. She realized that if she could keep getting comfortable being uncomfortable, she could learn any language. As I talked with Sarah Maria about her breakthrough, a light bulb went off for me. Comfort in learning is a paradox. You can't become truly comfortable with a skill until you practice it enough to master it. But practicing it before you master it is uncomfortable, so you often avoid it. Accelerated learning requires a second form of courage, being brave enough to use your knowledge as you acquire it. All right. If you start today, progress over time. If you start when you're ready, progress over time. Chart. Pretty much what it's saying is start today, which is why I started. Sooner the better. What do you mean it's already February? Okay. It's February and I'm rereading this chapter. Why? Because I fell off. What? Okay. Deliberately awkward. In a clever experiment, psychologists Caitlin Woolley and Ayelet Fishback studied hundreds of people taking improv comedy classes and randomly assigned them to focus on different goals. The ones who persisted the longest and took the most creative risks weren't the ones who were encouraged to focus on learning. They were the ones who had been advised to intentionally pursue discomfort. Your goal is to feel awkward and uncomfortable. It is a sign the exercise is working. The instructions said, once people saw discomfort as a mark of growth, they were motivated to stretch beyond their comfort zones. It worked for political rivals too. We usually try to motivate Democrats and Republicans to escape their echo chambers by urging them to seek new information. But in the research, if partisans were nudged to seek discomfort, instead they were more likely to download articles from across the aisle. When discomfort is a signal of progress, you don't want to run away from it. You want to keep stumbling toward it to continue growing. 7 months before her wedding, Sarah Maria decided to surprise her husband and his family by giving her wedding toast in their native tongue of Cantonese. The thought was terrifying, and that made it exciting. She wrote a draft in English and enlisted a tutor to translate it into Cantonese and record it for her. Then she treated the recording of the toast like a song on a playlist. She listened to it on repeat until she knew it by heart. She recited it on her way to the grocery store, hiding it from her husband to keep him in the dark, knowing her in-laws would test her after the toast. She started doing what she calls spamming your brain. She listened to podcasts in Cantonese and watched Cantonese language movies. She practiced talking daily in secret lessons with Cantonese tutor, embracing the pain of introducing herself with the wrong words and the embarrassment of reciting her monologue with the wrong tones. She had nightmares about choking and stumbling, but she reminded herself that feeling awkward and making mistakes was a sign of learning. She delivered the wedding toast beautifully, pronouncing 9 different tones correctly. Afterward, she joked with her husband's grandmother, who spoke only Cantonese. and her in-laws told her how much it meant to them that she took the time to honor their culture by learning their language. You don't have to wait until you've acquired an entire library of knowledge to start to communicate. Your mental library expands as you communicate. When I asked Sarah Maria what it takes to begin, she said she no longer waits to talk until she has a basic level proficiency. She starts talking on the first day. Discomfort be damned. I'm always trying to convince people to start speaking, she tells me. Just memorize a few sentences, a short monologue introducing yourself and explaining why you're learning the language. That advice was life-changing for Benny Lewis. During this time in Spain, he bought The Lord of the Rings in Spanish and sat down with the dictionary to translate a story he loved. It took him a week to finish the first page. 1 down, 700 to go. After 6 months of failing to learn Spanish, he realized he'd tried everything except actually speaking the language. That took a third form of courage, not just embracing and seeking discomfort, but amplifying it by being brave enough to make more mistakes. Biting your tongue, I once traveled to Costa Rica with a cousin. When he walked into a restaurant after a long hike, he mentioned that the fresh squeezed orange juice looked delicious. Oops. When he placed his order in Spanish, the server burst out laughing. Instead of jugo de naranja, he asked for fruto de periódico. He tried to order a glass of newspaper fruit. When you tried to use a new language for the first time, you probably felt a pang of anxiety. If you fumble with a foreign word, you'll embarrass yourself. If you commit a faux pas, you might offend others. My wife, Allison, studied Japanese in high school, and the final exam included a class trip to a restaurant to order in Japanese. She had so much anxiety about making mistakes and failing the test that she pretended to be sick. That's where courage comes in, to get practice speaking a language. You need to be brave enough to make many mistakes. The more, the better. Sarah Maria thinks this is one of the reasons why kids tend to absorb foreign languages faster than adults. Yes, they benefit from greater brain plasticity. The developing mind rewires more quickly than the developed one. And less interference from prior knowledge, they're not entrenched in the grammatical rules of one language. But they're also largely immune to the fear of embarrassment and the discomfort of making mistakes. Children don't hold back on communicating. They start babbling as soon as they know some new words. They're not scared of feeling stupid or being judged. They love newspaper fruit. The thought of making mistakes is especially distressing if you're shy. Shyness is the fear of negative evaluation in social situations, and Benny Lewis felt it intensely. As a socially awkward teenager at parties, he'd herd for a corner and play games on his phone. In language classes, he wouldn't raise his hand to participate. When he moved to Spain, he steered clear of his fears by gravitating to people who spoke English. When therapists treat phobias, they use 2 different kinds of exposure therapy: systematic desensitization and flooding. Systematic desensitization starts out with a microdose of the threat and gradually amps it up over time. If you're afraid of spiders, you draw a picture of one and then see one in a closed cage across the room. Before you get up close and personal with the daddy long legs in your bathtub, you learn to manage your fear in less threatening situations. Flooding is the opposite. A therapist might drop a creepy crawly on your arm. Sure, you might freak out, but having survived the ordeal unscathed, your visceral terror melts away. Exposure therapy reduces discomfort by amplifying it. An extreme example happens when pilots learning to fly, where there are few situations more frightening than an aircraft stalling. Stalling is when a plane starts hurtling toward the ground, usually when a pilot makes the mistake of flying too low, too slow, or too sleepy. Stalls are responsible for 15% of fatal commercial airline accidents and nearly a quarter of private fatal crashes. Many pilots have nightmares about their planes falling out of the sky. If you start training to be a pilot, you'll first go through systematic desensitization in a flight simulator. The simulator can familiarize you with the mechanics and sensory input of a stall, what to do with your hands, what the horizon looks like as you begin to fall. But when you're in the real cockpit, there will come a moment when your flight instructor gives you a terrifying instruction. Slow your speed and pull back on the controls to raise the nose until the plane stalls. This is the part you can experience only through full-on flooding. Your amygdala doesn't care how many times you run the flight simulator, that you're several thousand feet in the air with plenty of time to course correct. You're trapped in a huge, heavy metal cage, tumbling fast forward The Earth is an uncontrolled nosedive, and there's nothing that can prepare a human being for the pure horror of deliberately causing an aircraft to drop like a rock. If you want to get a pilot's license in America, you have to demonstrate that you can maneuver out of a stall and land your plane safely. Effective training programs are intentionally designed to introduce new and unexpected threats. Evidence suggests that this element of surprise is critical. If stall training becomes a predictable routine, it no longer prepares pilots for real-life emergencies. You can't be ready for anything if you haven't trained for everything. Pilots learn to cope with discomfort by intensifying it, and they build their skills as they navigate it. Amplifying discomfort was pivotal for Benny Lewis to learn new languages, to overcome his shyness. Benny started out with systematic desensitization. He put himself in mildly uncomfortable situations. He motivated strangers to approach him by wearing a leprechaun hat on the streets and showing up at concerts with a laser pointer. They had a disco filter for dancing. He got used to initiating interactions by handing out earplugs at loud events and clinking glasses with people at bars. After another 6 months in Spain, he was speaking solid Spanish and relocating to Italy to learn his next language. It was only a matter of time before he became a professional language hacker. His purpose was to become conversational in new languages in a matter of months, to communicate with strangers and teach others to do the same, and that led him to flooding. Benny calls it social skydiving. When he arrives in a new country, he commits to approaching anyone who's near him for more than 5 seconds. Instead of leading with a small talk, he takes a bigger leap to elicit a more meaningful response. When he crossed paths with someone from Valencia, where he lived in Spain, he burst out into a local song. When he checked in at a hostel in Brazil, he told the receptionist about his experience being overworked and underpaid as a receptionist in Rome. One of the biggest mistakes I see language learners making is believing that studying languages is about acquiring knowledge. Benny notes, it's not. Learning a new language is about building a communication skill. Learning is often understood as a process of recognizing, correcting, and preventing mistakes. Benny believes that if you want to become proficient in a language, rather than aiming to reduce your mistakes, you should strive to increase them. It turns out that he's right. Many experiments have shown that when students are learning new information, if they're randomly assigned to guess wrong before being given the right answer, they're less likely to make errors later on. When they're encouraged to make mistakes, we end up making fewer of them. Early mistakes help us remember the correct answer and motivate us to keep learning. Making more mistakes, theory and reality. So the theory is looking stupid, feeling shame, being laughed at, and experiencing discomfort. But the reality is getting smarter, gaining courage, laughing at yourself, expanding your comfort zone. When Benny is ready to start learning a new language, he sets an ambitious goal, to make at least 200 mistakes a day. He measures his progress by the number of errors he makes. The more mistakes you make, the faster you will improve and less they will bother you. He observes, the best cure to feeling uncomfortable about making mistakes is to make more mistakes. Along the way, Benny had put himself in some awkward positions. He introduced himself with the wrong gender, said he was attracted to a bus, and accidentally complimented someone for having a nice arse. But he doesn't beat himself up, because his goal is to make mistakes when he fumbles. People generally commend him for making an effort, and that motivates him to keep trying. Psychologists call their cycle learned industriousness. When you get praised for making an effort, the feeling of effort itself starts to take on secondary reward properties. Instead of having to push yourself to keep trying, you feel pulled toward it. The idea of speaking from day one has changed how I think about learning. You can code from day one, teach from day one, and coach from day one. You don't need to get comfortable before you can practice your skills. Your comfort grows as you practice your skills. Knowledge, comfort, practice, progress. How we think learning happens. How learning actually happens. Knowledge, practice, discomfort, more practice, and then back again, and then progress, and then comfort. We only get comfortable when we keep working towards it. A few years ago, Sarah Maria Hasbin noticed that someone was watching Korean dramas on her family's Netflix account. It was her dad. After visiting her in Korea, he became enamored with the culture and decided to secretly start learning the language. At age 77, he rapidly worked his way through vocabulary and grammar, and she's able to teach him. He's actually had a lot of Korean knowledge already. He's writing a lot and reading a lot, she says, but he was really nervous about speaking. He's finally at the point that we can speak a little bit. Today, Sarah Maria is the founder and managing director of a language and translation services company. She believes that as long as you're willing to be a little uncomfortable, it's never too late to learn. And that courage can be contagious. If we wait until we feel ready to take on a new challenge, we might never pursue it. There may not come a day when we wake up and suddenly feel prepared. We become prepared by taking the leap anyway. Chapter 2. Chapter 2? That wasn't chapter 3. Okay, chapter 2. Wait, let me check. Page 40. We're in chapter 1. So we're in part 1, chapter 3, The Imperfectionist. Oh, sorry. Chapter 2, Human Sponges. How many pages is it? I can read the whole thing. Ow. Building the capacity to absorb and adapt. It is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest. The species that survives is the one that is able best to adapt. Nearly 500 million years ago, the forces of nature wreaked havoc on our planet. The volcanic eruption spewed ash into the air and phosphorus into the ocean. Massive glaciers formed and melted, and ocean levels plunged and then spiked. More than 3/4 of all species died. It was one of the first and most mass extinction events in history, more devastating than one that decimated the dinosaurs. Strangely, though, there was at least one species that didn't just survive, it thrived. Entire forests of sea sponges grew and flourished, long before SpongeBob memed ruled the internet. Sponges ruled the ocean. Upon discovering sea sponges, scientists assumed they were plants. They're often shaped like bushes, they're almost entirely stationary, and they have no brains, nerves, organs, or muscles. But they don't subsist on sunlight. They consume food like animals. Sea sponges are now recognized as one of the Earth's earliest animals. When you think of a sea sponge, you're probably picturing a creature like that. That's like your kitchen sponge. It soaks up everything around it. But sea sponges don't just passively absorb food and oxygen. They adapt at filtering out toxic substances and unhealthy particles. Their flagella, which look like tiny hairs, create currents that catch nutrients and expel bacteria. They take in water through their outer walls and eject it through what looks like a miniature mouth. They can even sneeze out mucus through their pores. Some sea sponges can live more than 2,000 years. Despite having bodies that are soft and porous, they have skeletal structures that are strong and durable. When sponges are damaged by strong currents or munched on by predators, they don't necessarily float away or die. Some can regenerate via cervical pods, cells that allow a new sponge to develop once conditions improve. This capacity to absorb, filter, and adapt enables sponges to grow and thrive, and it's a capacity that matters a great deal to humans too. Being a sponge is more than metaphor, it's a character skill, a form of proactively that's vital to realizing hidden potential. Improving depends not on quantity of information you seek out, but the quality of the information you take in. Growth is less about how hard you work than how well you learn. Boosting the return on effort. As the youngest of 6 kids and a single mother in Chicago, Melody Hobson had a stressful childhood. Her mom often couldn't afford to pay the bills. Sometimes the only way to take a bath... Sometimes... What's my water? Keep going. Was to warm up water on a hot plate and pour it into the tub. Melody frequently came home from school to find that the electricity had been cut off or the phones had been disconnected. As her mom juggled bills, financial crisis erupted. Along with losing basic utilities, the family had their car repossessed and had to move regularly after being evicted. Melody had her heart set on attending an Ivy League university, but she started out lagging behind her peers. When she got in first grade, she struggled to concentrate and adapt, and she didn't know how to read. She was placed in a remedial class. Today, Melody is a co-CEO of a successful investment firm. She chairs the board of Starbucks. She was named one of Time's 100 most influential people. She not only got into Princeton, she will soon become the first black person to have a residential college named after her. If you ask people how Melody beats the odds, it won't be long before you hear about her legendary work ethic. When she was in elementary school, her bus was in an accident. As her classmates waited to be picked up, Melody walked to school. In high school, she repeatedly earned straight A's, served on the student council executive board, edited the spirit page on the yearbook, and volunteered as the treasurer and vice president of the Substance Abuse Prevention Club, as well as a tutor to local elementary schools. Melody's rise seems like quintessential American rags to riches story. A century ago, the great psychologist Max Weber traced extraordinary gains and achievement to the Protestant work ethic. He urged that before the Protestant Reformation, labor had been a necessary evil. Thanks to Martin Luther's teachings in the 1500s, it was transferred into a calling. Being a good Protestant meant that they had a moral obligation to serve society through productive work. Determination and discipline became virtues. Idleness and wastefulness became vices. That might be why many people today worship at the altar of hustle and pray to the high priest of persistence. But the distance we travel is due less to how much labor we do than the fruit it bears. Not long ago, the economists Sasha Becker and Ludger Woessmann decided to test the impact of Protestant Reformation on a grand scale. Did it affect what a population accomplished? They found that as a Protestant belief spread, entire countries had higher economic growth. But it wasn't necessarily better people were suddenly working harder. In most areas where Protestantism took hold, the historically dominant religion was Catholicism. At the time, the Catholic Church maintained careful control over the Bible. The Catholics typically absorbed its teachings orally at church. Martin Luther changed that. He wrote the first influential German translation of the Bible and preached that every school in every town should teach children to read scripture. That meant people had to learn to read. And once they could read, a whole world of information was at their fingertips. They could learn everything else at a much faster rate. Becker and Woessmann argue that the engine of the Protestant Reformation wasn't work ethic so much as literacy. Look at those two graphs of the proportion of Protestants in different countries as of 1900. The one on the left shows GDP per capita, and the one on the right shows the literacy rate. With an exception of a few Nordic outliers, more of them later in the book, the positive correlations are nearly identical. The countries with few Protestants, like Brazil, Italy, and Mexico, tended to have both low economic growth and low literacy rates. The countries that are swept up in Protestant Reformation, from Germany to Great Britain to Sweden, trended toward higher economic growth and greater literacy. Of course, it's impossible to draw casual conclusions from correlations with a small sample of countries that differ in countless ways. So Becker and Woessmann capitalized on a natural experiment with more than 450 countries in the German Empire. They identified the heart of the Protestant Reformation as Martin Luther's city of Wittenberg. Before the Protestant Reformation, whether a country was near or far from Wittenberg had no bearing on its educational or economic progress. Since communities closer to Wittenberg were more likely to be drawn into Protestantism, the economists were able to test whether they truly set them on different trajectories. The result, the closer countries were to the center of the Protestant Reformation. Protestant movement, the higher their average incomes were, and the higher literacy rates too. And after controlling for literacy rates, distance from Wittenberg no longer predict a higher income. To the extent that living near the origin of the Protestant Reformation raises people's incomes, it was entirely attributable to gains in the ability to read and write. The lessons here is layered. The progress we normally chalk up to working harder may actually be due to working smarter. Cognitive skills are sufficient for learning, but they're necessary. Basic literacy makes it possible to leverage character skills more effectively, to be proactive in learning more and learning faster. Prosperity rises as people become more capable of absorbing new ideas and filtering out old ones. Cognitive skills that amplify our ability to take in and understand information lay the groundwork for becoming a sponge. As we become more sponge-like, we become more equipped to achieve greater things. To paraphrase a verse from Hamilton, You get a lot further by being a self-starter. That's why Melody Hobson did. In second grade, Melody learned to read. That year, she won a short story writing contest, and the prize was a copy of Charlotte's Web. Although her first chapter book was a big leap, she was determined to read it cover to cover and learn the meaning of the words she didn't know. Melody's desire to soak up the words and world around her only grew with age. That desire eventually landed her a summer internship with John Rogers, who has founded one of the country's largest minority-owned investment firms. John used to read the newspaper at McDonald's on Saturday mornings, and Melody would meet him there even when she has already eaten breakfast. This was how she started studying the stock market. Once she got the investment bug, she knew as much about Warren Buffett as I did. John tells me she was committed to learning all about this world that she was interested in. She was a sponge. Sponginess was the first thing that stood out to me about Melody too. I first met her a decade ago when I was invited to give a presentation on my research to a group of VIPs. When I walked into the room, I recognized multiple Oscar-winning filmmakers and tech billionaires. It was Melody who asked the most questions. She was the only one to take notes. When it came to seeking and soaking up information, she was in a league of her own. Her engagement was more than curiosity. She had unusual levels of what social scientists call absorptive capacity. Absorptive capacity is the ability to recognize, value, assimilate, and apply new information. It hinges on two key habits. The first is how you acquire information. Do you react to what enters your field of vision, or are you proactive in seeking new knowledge, skills, and perspectives? The second is the goal you're pursuing when you filter information. Do you focus on feeding your ego or fueling your growth? Being reactive and ego-driven is a surefire way to short-circuit learning. It traps people in a protective bubble. They limit their access to new information and reject any input that threatens their image. Their thin skin leaves them with thick skulls. When people are proactive and ego-driven, it opens the door to more information. Rather than being passive consumers, they're active seekers of feedback. But if it's negative, it gets weeded out. It's too uncomfortable. They're impervious to constructive criticism. They become like Teflon. Nothing sticks. Absorbing approach and filtering goal. So if you're reactive and you have an ego, then you're like rubber. If you're reactive and you have growth, then you're like clay. If you're proactive and you have ego, then you're like Teflon. And if you're proactive and you have growth, then you are a sponge. You have the ability to filter your goals and absorb the approach. Have an absorbing approach. Okay, learning is more likely when people are reactive and growth oriented. Responding with an eye toward improvement makes people moldable. Like clay, they're often praised as coachable or teachable. They're not worried about whether criticism will hurt their egos. They embrace the discomfort and internalize whatever input might help their development. The problem is that they don't seek information beyond what's easily available. They don't make much progress until someone picks them up and shapes them. Their growth depends on guidance from others. They rarely take their learning into their own hands. The sweet spot is when people are proactive and growth-oriented. That's when they became sponges. They constantly take the initiative to expand themselves and adapt. The character skill is especially valuable when the deck is stacked against you. As a pair of young athletes in Africa learned, rebel without a coach. Growing up in a rural Kenyan village without electricity or cars, Julius Yigo enjoyed competing with his older brother to see who could throw a stick further. By the time he reached high school, he had set his sights on becoming a great javelin thrower. But he didn't have access to the right facilities, the ideal training routines, or the key equipment. Julius didn't even have a coach. He practiced on his own and did his best to teach himself. He was at a major disadvantage against his biggest rival. Ihab Abdelrahman was praised in a poor village in Egypt by a family that wasn't into sports. Until he was 17, he had only played soccer when a teacher encouraged him to try the javelin. He won the first competition he entered. Just 2 years later, he made the World Junior Championships and won a silver medal. On paper, Julius had plenty in common. How do I sound? Did I sound good? Should I check this a long time ago? Hello? Hello? Good enough. Both hailed from African communities where opportunities were limited. and sport was a ticket to a better life. Both loved soccer before shifting to track and field and discovering the javelin. But physically, it was David against Goliath. Throwing the javelin is a feat of strength. Early on, a top coach called Ihab's arm one of the best I've ever seen. He is big and strong and has a natural gift for throwing. Ihab was built for sport, towering at 6'4" and weighing 212 pounds. Julius didn't have the physical advantages. He stood just 5'9" and weighed only 187 pounds. He wasn't a freak of nature. He wanted to defeat Ihab. He would have to become a freak of nurture. In 2010, after 7 years of training, Julius finally got to face off against Ihab at the African Championships. He managed to win a bronze medal, but Ihab claimed the gold, and even his worst throw sailed further than Julius's best. The following year at the All-Africa Games, Julius bent down to pick up a metal spear. He stood up, cocked his arm back, and sprinted to the line, and he cranked his arm forward and launched his javelin into the air. He stumbled. Julius caught his balance in time to watch his javelin still nearly the length of a football field. It wasn't just a personal best, it was a new national record. Ihab finished 5th and Julius won the gold this time. His first throw was good enough to be Ihab's best. David had toppled Goliath. Look at his trajectory compared with Ihab, and with the other top finishers from the 2008 World Junior Championships who kept competing annually in the javelin. Over time, their progress slowed, plateaued, or even reversed. During the same period, Julius did more than just attain steady gains. He actually increased his rate of improvement. Ihab was coachable. After receiving a scholarship to train in Finland, widely regarded as the javelin capital of the world, he worked with a top coach there. He listened to advice and improved his technique and his speed. But he was more like clay than a sponge. His approach was reactive, not proactive. When he couldn't get funds from the Egyptian Federation for another trip to Finland, he didn't take the initiative to teach himself. He quit training altogether and didn't resume until 5 months later. By contrast, Julius took charge of his own growth. When people asked who his coach was, he said, YouTube. W. In 2009, Julius went to an internet cafe and started watching videos on top javelin throwers on YouTube. By scrutinizing their skills, he was able to start coaching himself. Everything began to change in my training, Julius says. Javelin requires technique, power, flexibility, and speed, and there were many of these aspects which I'd never looked at. In 2005, Julius won the World Javelin Championship. At 92.72 meters, he was the furthest throw in 14 years. Only 2 humans had ever hurled a javelin further. Other than a few months of training in Finland, Julius was self-taught. He had actively sought the information he needed to grow. His form was still unconventional. As he realized his javelin, he was often the only athlete to fall face first with his legs up in the air, like he was about to do the breakdancing move known as the worm. He had absorbed what he saw filtered out, what didn't apply to his unique style, and adapted his release to become the best in the world. Julius arrived in Rio in 2016 with high hopes for an Olympic victory. Unfortunately, he sustained a groin injury and only managed to compete one of the 6 throws during the finals. At 88.24 meters, he was still good enough to land him an Olympic silver medal, and do-it-yourself approach can be effective for certain kinds of learning. If you're doing a relatively mechanical task like throwing the javelin, you can make great strides by absorbing objective techniques. But in many walks of life, becoming a sponge depends on filtering more subjective guidance from others. As I learned early in my career, that feedback may not even arrive at all, and gathering it is not as simple as it seems. Getting the cold, hard truth. The message from your body came through loud and clear. You do not belong here. Between the sweat drenching my shirt and the butterflies in my stomach, I had no business being on stage. As a shy introvert, just raising my hand to speak in class was enough to give me jitters. In the days before caller ID, I even got nervous answering the phone. As a graduate student, I was determined to get over my fear of public speaking. The fast way. I didn't have time to dip my toe in the shallow of exposure therapy. I drove right into the deep end of flooding. I volunteered to give a series of guest lectures in my friends' undergraduate classes. I needed their input to learn, but when I asked their friends for feedback afterward, they came back with vague compliments. Interesting content, enthusiastic delivery. When they have helpful input, people are often reluctant to share it. We even hesitate to tell friends they have food in their teeth. We're confusing politeness with kindness. Being polite is withholding feedback to make someone feel good today.
Being kind is being candid about how they can get better tomorrow. It's possible to be direct in what you say while being thoughtful about how you deliver it. I don't want to embarrass you, but I realize it would be a lot more embarrassing if no one told you about the broccoli spouting from your gums. When you kick off a presentation, you know you're in trouble. If you say good morning and multiple people respond, great point. To help students overcome their hesitations, I gave out anonymous feedback. Forums, I wanted to become a sponge. I would absorb everything I could from the audience and then filter out what wasn't useful. Little did I know I was going about in the wrong way. The students panned my performance. Your nervous breathing sounds like Darth Vader. Then I interviewed for my first job at a top university, and the hiring committee rejected me. No one told me why until months later when a college finally came clean. You lack the confidence to command the respect of our students. The following year, when I delivered my first session for U.S. Air Force leaders, the colonels crucified me. I gained nothing from the session, but I trust the instructor gained useful insight. It was a crash course in demoralization by useless criticism. It's easy for people to be critics of cheerleaders. It's hard to get them to be coaches. The critic sees your weakness and attacks your worst self. A cheerleader sees your strengths and it celebrates your best self. A coach sees your potential and helps you become a better version of yourself. If I wanted to master the art of public speaking, I needed a better filter. I decided to turn my critics and cheerleaders into coaches. I've decided to do that in the past by asking for feedback. But research suggests that's a mistake. Instead of seeking feedback, you're better off asking for advice. Feedback tends to focus on how well you did last time. Advice shifts attention on how you can do better next time. In experiments, the simple shift is enough to elicit more specific suggestions and more constructive input. Rather than dwelling on what you did wrong, advice guides you toward what you can do right. What you can't change is the past. What you can change is the future. 4 more pages. I replaced my usual feedback questions with a basic request for advice. What's the one thing I can't do better? Suddenly, people started giving me useful tips. Don't lead with a joke unless you're confident it will land. The audience wasn't always ready for my dry humor. Or are they? Stop market. Oh, how do we get? Oh, it's a holiday. Start over. I replaced my usual feedback question with a basic request for advice. What's the one thing I can do better? Suddenly people started giving me useful tips. Don't lead with a joke unless you're confident it will land. The audience wasn't always ready for my dry humor, and hearing crickets amplified my anxiety. Open with a personal story, it humanizes you. I was trying to make it about the audience, not myself, but I was distancing myself from them instead of connecting with them. After a decade of practice, I got an invitation to give a TED Talk. I opened with a story about the time I failed to invest in Warby Parker, and I managed to wait a full 42 seconds to unveil my first joke, which got laughs. A later joke, but did bomb, and you can hear my nerves at several points. But all things considered, the talk went over well. Over the next few years, I was invited to stand in the red circle 3 more times, and Darth Vader only made a cameo. After every talk I gave, I asked the host what I can do better. It reminds me that not all advice is created equally, and the more suggestions you collect, the more important filtering becomes. How do you know which sources to trust? May the source be with you. When Melody Hobson sent off her college applications, she was thrilled to get into both Harvard and Princeton. In an attempt to lure her, Princeton invited her to breakfast with high-powered alumni. She was seated next to Bill Bradley, the NBA star turned U.S. Senator, as she bombarded him with questions. He was taken with her curiosity and started mentoring her. One day at lunch, Bill gave Melody some tough feedback. He told her that this is the basketball days. In his basketball days, he had seen talented players take all the shots themselves instead of passing the ball to others. She had a tendency to dominate the room, and if she wasn't careful, she would become a ball hog. Melody felt tears welling up. There's nothing wrong with taking criticism personally. Taking it personally shows you're taking it seriously. Getting upset isn't a mark of weakness or even defensiveness, as long as your ego doesn't stand in the way of you learning. A key to being a sponge is determining what information to absorb versus what to filter out. It's a question on which coasts to trust. I'd like to break trustworthiness down into 3 components: care, credibility, and familiarity. Care wants what's best for you. Familiarity knows well, but it might go wrong. Credibility has relevant expertise, might not be trying to help you. But care, credibility, and familiarity mine this for gold. Now I'll show the chart. If they don't care about you, they haven't earned the right for you to care about their reactions. If they're not qualified to judge this task or close enough to know your potential, you can discount their views and prove them wrong. But if they demonstrated that you matter to them and they know the domain in your skills or offering information to improve yourself, that doesn't mean you have to accept every bit of constructive criticism they give. You also don't have to agree with it to learn from it. By trying to understand what provoked their reactions, you can glean insights about how to elicit a different response next time. As Melody processed Bill Bradley's warning not to be a ball hog, she remembered that no one is entitled to receive feedback or advice. She thought to herself, if I cry, he won't give me feedback again. She realized he was taking the time to give her tough love because he believed in her potential and cared about helping her grow. There was also no question about Bill's credibility. From his basketball past and his political present, he knew what a ball hog looked like, and he had plenty of familiarity. Their mentoring relationship gave him a clear understanding of her skills and shortcomings. Instead of letting the tears flow, Melody sought advice about how she could improve. She discovered that being a ball hog was not so much a weakness as a strength overused or misused. Her absorptive capacity could suck the air out of a room, and her quest to learn could inadvertently silence their voices. She learned that she had to adapt how she expressed her thirst for information. Melody's constructive response motivated Bill to keep coaching. Her and the connection blossomed. Years later, he introduced her to the Starbucks founder, who invited her to join their board. When she got married, Bill walked down the aisle, and Melody called him the father she never had. Many people fail to benefit from constructive criticism because they overreact and undercorrect. Melody made resolution to do the opposite. She told herself that champions adapt. She would go out of her way to show an interest in others and use her absorptive capacity to ask them questions and learn more about them. Just as her coaches had done for her, she would help grow by dishing out tough love. That became a signature strength. Melody gained a reputation as the board member who challenged everyone else to think more broadly and deeply, as the mentor who never hesitated to tell the truth. I've seen it firsthand. Recently, Melody happened to be in the audience when I gave a new talk. Afterward, as her peers gave generic praise, I knew I could count on her for coaching. Sure enough, when I reached out, she called me with notes. My big takeaway was that I needed a clear, thorough line, so the attendees didn't lose the message. She wasn't just there to absorb and apply information of herself, she wanted to make sure the audience could absorb and apply it. That speaks to my favorite property of a sponge. At some point in the past, sea sponges branched off on their way. Hi, Jessica. I could chat, but I'm reading this book. At some point in the past, sea sponges branched off on their own evolutionary tree. We're not their descendants, but that hasn't stopped them from being good ancestors. As I read far and wide about sea sponges, I was delighted to discover something even more remarkable, that their capacity to absorb. It's their capacity to create. Sea sponges don't just expunge toxins, they also produce biochemicals. They protect and promote life and blah, blah, blah. At some point in the past, sea sponges branched off of their own evolutionary tree. We're not their descendants, but this hasn't stopped them from being good ancestors. As I read far and wide about sea sponges, I was delighted to discover something even more remarkable than their capacity to absorb. It's their capacity to create. Sea sponges don't just expunge toxins, they also produce biochemicals that protect and promote life with anti-cancer, antibacterial, antiviral, and anti-inflammatory properties. Substances from a Caribbean sea sponge spurred breakthroughs in the treatment of HIV, herpes, and leukemia. Compounds from a Japanese sea sponge have been developed into chemotherapy drug that has extended the lives of women from advanced breast cancer by blocking cell division. And a peptide from an Antarctic sea sponge offers a promising lead in the treatment of malaria. Despite this recent development, the greatest life-giving impact of sea sponges may have taken place about 500 million years ago. For decades, scientists believed that the new animal species emerged as oxygen and rose in the oceans. The latest evidence suggests that sea sponges actually contributed to the process. By filtering organic matter out of the water, they helped to oxygenate the oceans, which enabled animals to evolve. This means sponges may be partially responsible for all complex life as we know it. If not for sponges, the human race might not exist. But a sponge is not only a proactive skill, it's a pro-social skill. Done right, it's not just about soaking up nutrients that help us grow, it's about releasing nutrients to help others grow. And yeah, I'll stop there for this book, and I'll be right back. You can't hear me? That's not good. Doing good. Jessica, do you game? If so, what do you play? Jessica, what kind of games do you like? Find it right. Yeah. Jessica, can you hear me, or should I just type? Let's see. What am I playing right now? I'm playing Dota. I don't play Valorant. But I mainly like playing RPGs, shooters, action adventure, Metroidvania. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Well. More reading. Wow.
Here you go. I think I need to keep reading for now. I'm going to read the book of Hebrews. Oops, I skipped it. Tiny Bible. Okay, the book of Hebrews. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom all he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of his majesty in heaven. So he became the much superior to the angels, as the name he had inherited is superior to theirs. Yeah. The Son superior of angels. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my Son"? Oh. Jessica, who else do you watch? Normally. Today have become... Okay. The Son superior to angels. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my Son"? Today I become your Father. Or again, I will be his Father, and he will be my Son. And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." In speaking of the angels, he says, "He makes his angels spirits, and his servants flames of fire." But about the Son he says, "Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has set you above your companions, by anointing you with the oil of joy." He also says, "In the beginning, Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe, like a garment that will be changed. But you remain the same, and your years will never end." To which of the angels did God ever say, "Sit at my right hand, until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who inherit salvation? Warning to pay attention. We must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. For since the message spoken through angels was binding, and every violation and disobedience received its just punishment, how shall we escape if we ignore so great a salvation? This salvation, which was first announced by the Lord, was confirmed to us by those who heard him. God also testified to it by signs, wonders, and various miracles, and by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. Jesus made fully human. It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking, but there is a place where someone has testified. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man that you care for them? You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor, and put everything under their feet. In putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present we do not see everything subject to them, but we do see Jesus, who has made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death,
so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters, he says. I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly I will sing your praises, and again I will put my trust in him. And again he says, here am I, the children of God have given me. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who are all their lives had held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might take atonement to the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who have been tempted. Cool. I wouldn't say streaming is my passion, but I just started doing it, and it's fun. But I would say my passion is gaming, and I like learning and working out. But yeah. Those are a few of the people that I watch. Jesus greater than Moses. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters who share in their heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as our apostle and high priest. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of great honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house was great honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, bearing witness to what would be spoken by God in the future. But Christ is faithful as a son over God's house, and we are in his house. If indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and in hope in which we glory, warning against unbelief. So as the Holy Spirit says, today is your ear. If you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as you did in the rebellion, during the time of testing in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested and tried me. Though for 40 years they saw what I did, that is why I was angry with their generation. I said, their hearts are always going astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared my oath in anger, they shall never enter my rest. See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God, but encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original conviction firmly to the very end. As has just been said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did in the rebellion. What's up, Jessica? Oh yeah, that would be wonderful. I've been meaning to stream, but I just didn't have the courage. That's it. Yeah. And yeah, I streamed Elden Ring like a year ago, and at that time I'm like, okay, I'll start streaming, and I just never did, and just distractions of life and all. Yeah. Thank you, Jessica. My name is the same as this. Who were they who heard and rebelled? Were they not all those Moses led out of Egypt? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies perished in the wilderness, and to whom did God swear that they would never enter his rest, if not to those who disobeyed? So that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. A Sabbath rest for the people of God. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we also have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them, because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. Now for those who have believed entered the rest, just as God had said. So I declared an oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest, and yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in those words, on the seventh day God rested from all his works, and again in the passage above he says, they shall never enter my rest. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter the rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience, God again set a certain day, calling it today. This he did when a long time later he spoke through David, as in the passages already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are. Yet he did not sin. Let us then approach to God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins, as well as for the sins of the people. And no one takes this honor on himself, but he receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory becoming high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son, today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obeyed. Jessica, it's the same name as what I have on here. I don't know what to do with that. Just so you know, I do have someone to make artwork for you. A Sabbath rest for the people of God. How do I do this? Yeah, that's enough.
Got it.
I'm gonna game now. Let's see. Should I play? Bioshock? Do they even have Dredge installed? That's weird. Should have it installed. Too many games.
The nose picks in. What we running with today?
You already know.
Joe, Trav is about to go.
Fortnite? Do it. Line resources. Becoming tiny. That's one of.